Okay, so Kurt, you just got back from a couple of really big events talking about some very technical topics, standardization of homomorphic encryption, as well as workshops to actually see how these things can be applied and operationalized. Can you give us a bit of a background on the organizations behind the events and what the goals of the events were this year?
Sure thing. So, no, thank you for asking. And these are kind of regular events that we really like to see in terms of engagements with our community and both our peers and users of the technologies that we're building, capabilities that we're developing. And there were two events. The first event was an event called the Homomorphic Standards Consortium meeting. The second event was WAHC, the workshop on applied homomorphic cryptography. And these two events were both well attended and they had similar but very different purposes. The first event, which was the industry consortium meeting, was our it is our regular community event to basically help define recommendations for both the homomorphic encryption technology, recommendations for security standards, benchmarking, hardware interface standards, and so forth. And this community is something that we co-founded roughly, I would say, about 10 years ago with colleagues at Intel, Microsoft, and IBM, really to help advocate for this privacy technology and to advocate to national standards bodies such as NIST about how they can start to formulate formal standards for the technology also. Overall, I think that this community has been very, very successful in this regard, in that NIST is pushing forward with standardization efforts around homomorphic encryption. And as a community, this is our seventh event, very well attended by nearly 100 participants. And we've been defining standards for and recommendations for benchmarking the technology, hardware interface standards, and compilers and security settings. Whereas early events were driven more by academic collaboration, the past few years, and this event in particular, was driven primarily by industry, both large entities such as AWS, Intel, and Samsung, let alone startups such as Duality also. And basically every major participant in the community, including users, were represented at this industry meeting. And we've already organized the next one, which will be happening in March in Istanbul, hosted by colleagues over there also. So it's a very international community and a very inclusive community too. The second event, which we hosted, was this WAHC. Throughout, and this is basically I believe, the 11th or 12th instance of this. Every year, we'd like to have a research-oriented event where people active in the community can showcase, after peer review, the latest advances in the technology itself. This event was affiliated with a top-tier ACM conference called CCS, and as we have been every year for the past few years. And we had something of a who's who of people doing work in the space, basically presenting the latest results to the broader community as it is too. We had a standing room only crowd for this event also. It was very successful to kind of see the broad participation with engagement from top tier organizations like Google, like Intel, like some of the very top universities working in the space too. So overall, very, very happy for this. The next one is going to be in Taipei, Taiwan next October, and also is still associated with CCS, which is the top tier cybersecurity academic venue run by the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery. Thank you.
So it seems like, with new technology, it's going to start in a lab somewhere, and then these sorts of organizations are there to kind of take it to that next step of, okay, now this is how you operationalize it, and then maybe the market gives feedback on, well, we're stuck operationalizing it because of performance or just complexity in using it, and that gets cycled back. At what stage do you see the market having grown over these last essentially a full decade?
Right. Yeah, so I got engaged with homomorphic encryption during the very, very earliest days when it was first published. I happened to be in the right place at the right time to drive some of the earliest DARPA-funded projects to build some of the first implementations of the technology, and I've been involved, enthusiastically involved ever since. What we've seen as the technology has matured and our ability to use the technology has matured is not just the growth of the ecosystem, but the broadening applicability of the technology. And that applicability is driven by increased performance, increased interoperability with existing computing systems, such as both hardware and software, and integrating with existing legacy hardware and software, and usability such as um, integration with existing data science methods and things like that. So it's been exciting to see the growth of this technology. And I think this is one of the reasons we've seen a shift in the community, being driven more by industry than by academia, is because the maturation of the technology has broader applicability, and that engenders also broader commercial interest, commercial success, which also happens to have the follow on of interest from organizations such as NIST, which would only get engaged with standardizing this technology if they saw strong commercial interest because they're part of the Department of Commerce. So all signals are pointing upwards and onwards with respect to the use and adoption of this technology much more broadly across society.
And obviously, we all saw the announcement of Apple using homomorphic encryption this last summer. And then last year, Google was using your open source OpenFHE library to build their compiler. So it's already been like the industry is doing work on it. It's out there. And even, to be completely biased, Duality has active clients using this technology in the wild. So what were some of the announcements in, like you have to divide which event, were to you signaling like the next major milestones and where things are going, standardization and then the workshops?
Sure. So the kind of the major announcements that come to mind is a basically a push by NIST to broaden standards and cryptography standards for the technology themselves. And NIST has been very active in hosting privacy enhanced computation workshops, particularly that was showcase fully homomorphic encryption, where us and members of our community have been speaking. There have been um, also announcements by NIST, as I alluded to before, about ongoing standards work. Also announced at the workshop industry consortium meeting was basically a component of the community standardizing and building a consortium around specifically hardware interfaces to accelerate homomorphic encryption. And so these are companies, particularly Aptalysis, Niobium, and Chain Reaction, which have existing commercial products, computing products to accelerate homomorphic encryption, including our library, OpenFHE, and defining amongst themselves hardware interface standards to accelerate our core products and core technologies. And companies particularly focused on this as a reason for existence, which is great. We also saw announcements of standardization efforts around benchmarks, and particularly ways of measuring the performance of the technologies. And there has been follow-on meetings which have been scheduled, driven by Shai Halevi at AWS, particularly to define benchmarks and measure the performance of these technologies as they go too. So all very exciting as they are.
So I think most people might be able to understand the benefit of these workshops and, seeing the growth of applicable business use cases or agency use cases. Can you go into a little bit about the significance of standardization? Why do we need standardization, and why are these moments of progress like truly milestones that everyone should be excited about?
Right. No, that's a great question. And I see two major reasons for standardization. One major reason, particularly when there is an existing commercial interest in the technology, is to set standards for the security of the underlying cryptography. That there has to be an independent body to basically give recommendations about what is acceptable use for the technology, acceptable um, parameter settings for the technology. And what we've been doing as a community is formulating community recommendations. And NIST has been taking these community recommendations and is in process of basically formalizing them as formal recommendations. What this does also, in NIST's interest, is also a signal to broader industry, in that there's a lot of advanced users of the technology who are already adopting it and deploying it in operation to address operational needs, but less informed organizations that don't necessarily have internal capabilities to assess privacy technologies such as homomorphic encryption have been emboldened to adopt these technologies because of the very strong signals from NIST that these technologies are ready for adoption also in terms of setting NIST blessed standards. And of course, there's the other side of it too, of one of the main reasons for standardization is to foster interoperability, so that when companies adopt these technologies, that they know that there's going to be a suite of vendors that can support these things, such as the suite of vendors that are providing hardware acceleration technologies in support of our deployments also.
That makes a ton of sense. So the standardization is, hey, vendors, these are the technologies that have been proven and check all the boxes. You can go ahead and start building these into your platforms.
Yep.
And then that's how it moves forward. So where can people and who would be interested in participating in which of these? Like who would you recommend to take a look and where would they go?
Sure. So WHC is basically the top tier peer reviewed venue for publishing results related to homomorphic encryption, and it's affiliated with basically the top tier cybersecurity academic conference. And we see WHC as the place to go for folks who basically have peer reviewed results that they want to go and publish. Homomorphicencryption.org and the standards meeting homomorphicencryption.org is the best place for both vendors and users of the technology to engage more broadly with the vendor community, as it is both understanding what the current status of standards, to make recommendations about solutions that they need, and basically almost have something akin to like a speed dating of other vendors of the technology to see what the best fit is overall. And so we highly recommend both participation of vendors and users of the technology in the homomorphicencryption.org standards meeting.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for the time today, Kurt. And again, you guys heard it. We'll have a link in the comments of the video so you guys can go check it out and start to become familiar with how you can take advantage of these new techs.